The back door of America's richest families. I want you to imagine this for a second. In every ultra-wealthy family, where there are lavish parties, multi-million-dollar paintings, and powerful handshakes, there's always a back door. Not the door for honored guests, the door for the help. And I believe, if you've lived long enough, you already know a truth that's hard to swallow. The person who knows the most secrets in a family is almost never the person sitting at the banquet table. It's the one who cooks, changes the bed sheets, cleans the bathroom, the one who watches the master of the house grow weaker day by day, the one who hears the arguments behind closed doors, and the one who knows exactly who is lonely, who is afraid, and who is slowly losing control of their own life. Those secrets can become loyalty, but they can also become power. And the story I'm telling you today is the story of a woman who entered through that back door and walked out holding the fortune of an empire. Her name was Barbara Piasecka Johnson. But before we step into the full story, in this video, we're going to uncover why Barbara Piasecka Johnson, the maid, didn't just clean, but held the survival secrets of a wealthy family. Where did she come from? Did she get close to George Johnson because of beauty, or for a completely different reason? How did Barbara become the gatekeeper? Why was Jasna Polana a symbol of conquest? The final will, Maprudo Cut. The trial, when family turns into a battlefield. The bathroom tape, emotional turning point. The out-of-court settlement, where no one wins cleanly. And the real legacy, the fear of the ultra-rich. Stay with me, because the biggest surprise is waiting at the very end of this video. In 1968, she arrived in the United States with about $100 in her pocket, cooking skills so bad that no one dared to eat her food, and an art history degree from communist Poland, something that, in America at the time, was almost worthless. But 15 years later, in that same place, Barbara walked out of a mansion in New Jersey as its owner. From maid to wife, to the sole heir of a fortune worth Conbero Bonchum Numchum million. And to make that happen, the billionaire's 6 biological children received only about so million each. The rest? Almost all of it went to her. So what happened during those years? How did a foreign woman, poor English, no prestige background, defeat an entire powerful family in one of the fiercest inheritance battles in American history? And even more important, what is the real price of getting everything? If you're ready, in the next part I'm taking you back to post-war Poland, where Barbara was born, and you'll see why poverty, discipline, and religion can shape someone into a woman, dangerous in a very specific way. A mind forged in poverty and discipline. I want you to step away from glamorous America for a moment. Go back to 1968, in a small city in Poland, still being stitched back together after war under a harsh communist regime. Barbara was born into a family with no power, no money, no connections. Her father worked for the railroad. Her mother lived a life centered around church, discipline, and endurance. This wasn't the romantic, cinematic kind of poverty. This was the kind of poverty where you're taught one brutal lesson. If you're born somewhere, chances are you'll die there. And in a society like that, there was only one escape: education. Barbara didn't grow up with parties. She grew up with books, Catholic doctrine, and a cold belief that knowledge is the one thing no one can take from you. She studied art history, drowning herself in religious paintings and European masterpieces she could only see in blurry textbook prints. Walks she understood perfectly well. She might never touch them in real life, not once in her entire lifetime. Think about that. A young woman living in a country where leaving the nation required state permission, where foreign currency was almost mythical, and she spends her youth studying the art of Europe's aristocracy. That wasn't accidental. That was preparation. In the late 1960s, when immigration opportunities opened, Barbara didn't treat it like an adventure. She treated it like the only gamble she would ever get. After a brief period working for a noble family in Italy, she arrived in America with about Tamda Mochamber to Chum English so weak that she had to rely entirely on Catholic networks to find work. A Polish priest in New York helped her get domestic jobs in wealthy northeastern households. And then he introduced her to a place her entire future would revolve around: the New Jersey estate of J. Seward Johnson and his wife, Esther. When Barbara was hired, she was only supposed to be a cook, but the truth is, she was terrible at it. Meals were criticized, dishes were undercooked. Complaints came from the family and from other staff. Very quickly, she was moved out of the kitchen. From cooking to errands. From errands to cleaning, serving, running small tasks. Jobs people often call invisible. At the time, in the eyes of the Johnson children and the other servants, Barbara was just a quiet Eastern European maid, half-y accent. Few words, not social. But there was something no one realized in time. Barbara watched. Barbara remembered. And Barbara understood this. Inside this house, there was one man who didn't need a great cook. He needed someone who could understand his world. That man was the master of the house. In the next part, I'll tell you the moment everything started to shift. The moment an immigrant maid's art history knowledge became the key that opened the heart and the power of an aging billionaire. When a maid becomes the only person who gets hurt, I want you to focus on one crucial detail here. Barbara didn't rise because of beauty, and it wasn't luck. She rose because she knew how to say exactly what her employer needed to hear. Inside the Johnson mansion, everything was expensive. Paintings, antiques, religious icons, European furniture. But most people around Johnson saw these things as assets. Barbara was different. She understood those paintings. She could talk about schools, time periods, religion, symbolism. She knew what needed restoration, what was authentic, and what was just lifeless decoration. And for the first time in that house, J. Seward Johnson wasn't talking to a servant. He was talking to an equal mind in the one subject that mattered to him. Put yourself in the position of a wealthy man growing old, surrounded by children who look at him like a living trust fund, and a wife whose marriage has been cold for a long time. Then suddenly, a woman appears, always ready to listen, always there when needed, and most importantly, she makes him feel valuable again, admired again. From maid, Barbara slowly became an unofficial assistant, then a companion on art-related trips, then someone present in the family's aesthetic decisions. And right then, the marriage between Johnson and his wife, Esther, began to crack. Imagine how Esther must have felt, a woman who used to be the lady of the house, now forced to watch the woman who once cleaned her rooms, traveling with her husband, sitting beside him in meetings, and slowly becoming the center of the household. No insults needed. The humiliation was already loud enough. The Johnson children felt it too. Every time they visited, Barbara was everywhere. Every conversation with their father had to go through her. Every schedule had her fingerprints on it. From an outsider, Barbara became the gatekeeper. Arguments exploded. Emotional confrontations unfolded inside those luxurious rooms. The staff stood in the middle, unsure who to be loyal to. Eventually, Esther filed for divorce, a divorce that cost millions of dollars, and more importantly, shrank the future inheritance the children believed would be theirs. In their eyes, it was obvious. Their father was being manipulated. And the manipulator was the Polish woman, more than 40 years younger than him. In 1971, after the divorce was finalized, Johnson married Barbara in a quiet ceremony. Not a single child attended. That moment marked a complete transformation from immigrant maid to Mrs. Johnson. And right after the wedding, they began building something that would ignite hatred later on, a massive estate named Jasna Polana. Next, I'll tell you why Jasna Polana was never just a house, but Barbara's clearest declaration of power. And the moment the Johnson children realized they were losing everything. A house not just to live in, but to declare who holds power. I need you to understand this clearly. Jasna Polana was never just a house. From the beginning, it was a statement. After the marriage, J. Seward Johnson and Barbara began building a 140-acre estate outside Princeton. The estimated cost reached $1 million, an enormous number at the time. The name Jasna Polana in Polish means bright clearing. And remember this. It wasn't Johnson who chose that name. It was Barbara's world. She supervised every aesthetic detail, from old master paintings, antique tapestries, religious relics, to museum-grade furniture. The home wasn't decorated to impress guests. It was designed like a temple of control. Every wall, every room reflected the mind and taste of a woman who once could only see art through textbooks in communist Poland. To Barbara, Jasna Polana was proof. She didn't just enter the world of the ultra-rich. She reshaped it. But to Johnson's children, every painting on the wall felt like a cold reminder. The woman who used to be the help now didn't just control their father's daily life. She controlled the space, the taste, and the asset decisions. Time passed, and Johnson entered his tamizae. His health declined due to prostate cancer. Hospital visits became more frequent. Strong painkillers left him lucid some days, foggy on others. And in that situation, only one person was always there. Barbara. She managed the visiting schedule. She controlled who could see him, when, and for how long. The phone, the bedroom, the paperwork, everything went through her. I want you to pause for a second and ask yourself, if you're tamilam, tamiso, tami by years old, in pain dependent, and your entire world shrinks until only one person is constantly present, who truly holds the power. That question became an obsession for the Johnson children. And then, in the final year of his life, something happened that severed what little remained of the family relationship. A new will was signed, only weeks before Johnson died, in May 1973. This will nearly wiped out previous arrangements. Most of the wealth was no longer divided by old formulas. Almost everything was left to Barbara. The children were not erased entirely, but what they received was more symbolic than inheritance. One child received $1 million and a household in Cape Cod, assume he later described as a cold slap in the face, because everyone understood how tiny it was, next to a fortune of hundreds of millions. Charity Johnson had supported for years was completely removed from the will. The message was crystal clear. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was intent. And from that moment, the real war began. In the next part, I'll take you inside the most brutal inheritance trial in American history. where Johnson's children accused Barbara of manipulation, isolation, and coercion of a dying man, and where a tape recording from a bathroom changed the entire direction of the case. When people realize this isn't a family anymore, it's a battlefield, I want you to picture the moment. Their father had just died, and what waited for the Johnson children wasn't unity, but a shock that made their blood run cold. The final will was announced. And within minutes, they understood. They didn't just lose their father, they lost almost everything they believed was theirs since birth. Not one child, all six. They were used to living rich, yes, but they were also used to an assumption no one needed to say out loud. This fortune would eventually return to Johnson blood. And now the person holding power was not a Johnson at all. It was Barbara Piasecka Johnson. The woman they believed entered through the back door now stood at the center of everything. They refused to accept it, and they didn't plan to stay silent. They filed a lawsuit with an extremely serious accusation that J. Suo Johnson at Tamibay was no longer mentally competent when he signed that final will, that Barbara exerted improper influence, isolated him from his children, controlled the phone, the bedroom, the visiting schedule, forced him to sign documents he no longer fully understood. In short, they didn't call it freedom to distribute wealth. They called it systematic manipulation. The case quickly became far more than a normal inheritance dispute. It turned into a public dissection of a billionaire's final months. Armies of lawyers were hired, geriatric doctors, handwriting experts, medical records subpoenaed. Every memory, every offhand comment Johnson ever made was examined. Witnesses described a man sometimes sharp, sometimes confused. Some days he remembered everything. Some days he wasn't sure what day it was or who had just left the room. And at the center of nearly every testimony was the same repeated image. Barbara as the absolute gatekeeper. The only one always there. The only one who knew what he needed. The only one standing between him and the rest of the world. But then Barbara's side struck back. Her lawyers painted a completely different story. They argued Johnson was not Nav, that he had long been distant from his children, who, according to them, only appeared when money was involved. They emphasized that each child already possessed massive wealth through trusts set up decades earlier. That this lawsuit wasn't born from love, but from rage at being pushed out of the center of power. According to Barbara's side, the final will reflected something deeply human. A man choosing to leave everything to the person who cared for him every day, not to the people who treated inheritance like an automatic right. By early 1986, the trial officially began, and within days, it turned into a gigantic public drama. More than high-chum lawyers, aides, and experts came and went through the courtroom. Every detail of life at Jasnapolina was dragged into the light. Who sat where at dinner, who was allowed into the bedroom, who slammed a door harder during an argument. But I'm telling you honestly, all of that was only the opening act, because something showed up later that froze the entire courtroom, a secret audio tape recorded in a bathroom. And here's the twist I'm going to reveal. Where that tape came from, what was on it, and why it turned Barbara from a devoted wife into the most frightening figure in the entire case. The bathroom tape, and the moment everything flipped. I want you to imagine the atmosphere in that courtroom. Hundreds of people, tens of millions of dollars in legal costs, and one question hanging over everyone. Was Barbara a devoted wife, or the most dangerous manipulator in that house? According to the plaintiffs, the answer was on a cassette tape. That tape didn't come from lawyers. It didn't come from police. It came from another maid in the home, that Polish woman named Izabela Potoka. She testified that she secretly brought a recorder into a bathroom at Jasna, Polina, hiding it in clothing, not to blackmail anyone, but to protect herself. When the tape was played in court, no one could sit still. In Polish, translated live into English, Barbara Piasecka. Johnson's voice rang out, sharp, rapid, furious. She insulted the other maid as lazy, useless, unable to do anything properly. She even mocked her pregnancy, questioned her value, questioned why she even existed in that house. The bathroom, acoustics made every scream feel trapped and echoing, like it was hitting listeners straight in the chest. Isabella testified it wasn't an isolated incident. According to her, behind the gates of Jasna Polina, Barbara ruled the house like a tyrant. Sudden fits of rage, public humiliation, a cold look that could silence people instantly. Make one small mistake, and you would be crushed. The Johnson children's lawyers seized that tape like the ultimate weapon. They told the jury, if Barbara could speak to a maid like that, imagine what she could say to an 30-year-old man in pain, dependent on medication and oxygen. Depende Jasna Polana as a house of fee, where the elderly, nurses, and servants lived under pressure, and at the center stood a woman who tolerated no resistance. But Barbara's side countered again. Her lawyers argued the tape captured a single angry moment taken out of context, that high standards and a harsh voice were not the same as abuse, that unhappy employees, especially those fired, would become tools for Johnson's children. According to them, the true hatred didn't come from Barbara's behavior, but from decades of emotional distance between Johnson and his children. The tape didn't prove manipulation. It only proved Barbara could be unpleasant. The trial dragged on for 18 weeks. Legal fees crossed all Lars, high million. And then, just as the jury was preparing to deliberate, both sides suddenly reached an out-of-court settlement. No verdict, no legal conclusion about competence or manipulation. Only one raw truth. Both sides were afraid of what would happen if the jury decided. Now we're at the peak. Do you know who really won, how the money was finally split, and why this case permanently changed how the ultra-rich look at marriage and wills? I believe you'll be surprised. Keep watching. Who won? Who lost? And the lesson that terrified the ultra-rich. When the settlement was announced, there was no applause, no feeling of total victory for either side, only cold numbers. Barbara kept roughly $90 million in cash, stocks, and real estate, enough to place her among the richest women in the world at the time. Johnson's 6 children, combined, received about $1 of the disputed estate, about $1 million each, in addition to their separate trusts they already had. The Harbor Branch Ocean Research Organization, previously removed entirely from the will, recovered tens of millions of dollars, enough to continue surviving. There was no jury verdict, no official conclusion about whether Barbara manipulated him or not. Legal history didn't record right and wrong. But the wealthy class remembered clearly. After this case, estate planning experts began referencing it as a classic warning, not about maids, about the final years of life, a phrase spread among dynastic families. A younger, late-life wife can erase every assumption, and people began calling Barbara the maid who gave birth to 1,000 prenuptial agreements. After the trial, Barbara almost disappeared from American public life. She lived between Monaco and Poland. Her wealth continued to grow, with estimates placing it at $1 billion by the mid-1990s. But one detail stayed unforgettable, even with hundreds of millions, then billions. Barbara became famous for scrutinizing small spending. She demanded employees use coupons when shopping. She weighed minor expenses with the tension of someone who once arrived in America with nothing. That wasn't just stinginess. It was the mark of a deeper fear, the fear of going back to having nothing. Barbara died on April 1, 2013 in Poland at age 76. And you know what's striking? After 3 decades, the first line of her obituary never changed. The maid who married the Johnson and Johnson heir. Not art scholar, not collector, not billionaire. That's where her story ended. But the question didn't. In the final part, I want to talk to you directly. Was this a story about love? Oh, about power? Was Barbara a manipulator? Or simply the one person who understood the rules before everyone else? This isn't a story about the maid. It is about power before we end. I want to tell you something straight. If you only see this story as a miracle rise, then you miss the most frightening part, because this isn't the story of a poor woman meeting a billionaire. And it's not as simple as love or no love. This is a story about power in the last years of life. Barbara didn't win because she was smarter than everyone. She won because she understood a truth most people refuse to face. When humans grow old, power no longer lies in money or fame. It lies in who is present when the bedroom door closes. Johnson's children had money. Status, the best lawyers in America. But they didn't have presence. Barbara did. She was there every day. She controlled the rhythm of life. She became the only world left for a dying man. And in the math of inheritance, the person who controls access eventually controls the signature. I'm not saying Barbara was a victim, but I'm not calling her a monster either. She was the perfect product of a life forged in poverty, discipline, scarcity, and a system where the one who understands the rules first wins. The Johnson children didn't lose because they were enough. They lost because they believed blood was enough. This case left no legal precedent, but it left fear. After Barbara, the ultra-rich signed more prenuptial agreements, control wills more likely, feared late-life relationships more than ever before. And if you ask me, what legacy did Barbara Pizeka Johnson truly leave behind? Not the hundreds of millions, not Jasna Polana, but a cold reminder and power. The person closest to your weakness is also the most dangerous. I want to hear your opinion. If you were in the Johnson children's position, what would you do differently? And if you were Barbara, would you believe you were only taking the one chance your life ever gave you? Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe to the channel, like, leave a comment, and share it so more people can watch